we're back with section 9.3. We're talking about percentages in this chapter. Last lesson in 9.2, we were learning how to find percentages of certain numbers using proportions, making each of those into a proportion. Well, today we're going to learn about how to do it in a different manner, and it's really actually my favorite way of doing it, just a different way of doing it. But the best thing about looking at all the different ways to come up with a number, or to come up with a percent, or to come up with whatever, to come up with an answer in math, it's good to know all the different ways, because a lot of times if you know the different ways, it makes more sense to you. And then depending on what kind of situation you're in life, you might need to use this way or this way or this way. So anyway, let's look at 9.3. We're on page 187 at the bottom. Now in the last lesson, like I said, we were looking at using a proportion to find a percentage. But there's actually another way. So to understand it, we got to back up and review what we learned about multiplying fractions back in section 6.1. Now, we learned that it was helpful to think of multiplications with partial quantity multipliers as finding that portion of the other number. For instance, when we multiplied 1/4 by 2, we were really asking what 1/4 of 2 was. Now, let's turn the page. So basically, I'm going to go ahead and let you know this. Anytime you see in math the word of, it means multiplication. It means multiply, one way or the other. Remember how we use all these different ways of multiplication? This word means to multiply. Basically, that's what it means. Okay? So that's where that's going to come into play in this lesson. So look at the top of page 188. Okay? It's going to show you 1/4 of 2, which is a half. Now the same concept applies to percent. So after all, 1/4 and 25% represent the same quantity. So 25% of, or times, 2 equals 1/2. So 25% times 2 equals 1/2. Now when you multiply any number by a percent, we're really finding a specific portion of that number. Likewise, when trying to find a percentage, we're really looking for a portion of a base. For example, when finding how many dollars off an $86 purchase we would get, we used a 20% discount. We really want to find 20% of $86. Thus, rather than writing out a proportion, you could use multiplication to find the percentage of that number. So if you take your rate times your base, you'll find your percentage. So when you use this method, you would find 20% of $86 by finding the product of 20% times 86. Of course, to use this method, you have to know how to multiply percents. So let's look right here at the little section at the bottom of 188 where it says multiplying and dividing percents. Now you can multiply or divide percents simply by converting the percent to either a decimal or a fraction. So if we're looking at 20% times $86, two different ways you can do it. You can convert 20% to a decimal. Remember we learned that 2 or 3 lessons ago, where you take a percent, move the decimal 2 places to the right, to the left, and that converts it back to a decimal. So you get 0.2 times $86, you get $17.20. Now, if you converted 20% to a fraction, it would be 20 over 100, because you remember 20% is just 20 of 100, okay? Times $86, of course that would be over 1. Remember, you take a whole number over 1, and you just multiply across, and you would get 1,720 over 100, but to convert that back to a decimal, you would have to move your decimal 2 places to the left, because you'd have to undo it. Okay? Now, then you can use division to check your answer. So you would take 1720 and divide that by 20%. And there again, you could convert it back to a decimal. 1720 divided by 0.2, $86. Or you could take 1720 and divide that by 2/10, because that's what 0.2 is. And that equals 1720. You use your division with fractions that we learned. Now, as you can see, the decimal was the easier way to complete the multiplication and the division. So in general, to multiply or divide a percent, basically convert it to a decimal. That's what you're going to do. So now, notice that multiplying 20% by $86 gave us the same answer, 1720, that we found in the last lesson when we were doing that as a proportion. Whether you find the answer through a proportion or multiplication, we're finding the same thing. The amount of $86 that represents the same ratio as 20 per 100. That's what you're finding. There's a mathematical reason why both of those methods, setting a proportion and multiplying, arrive at the same answer. But we'll have to wait until we get to book 2 to examine that reason. For now, just get comfortable with using either method to find the percentage of a base. And there's your keeping perspective. And there's a little note over here to the right of that. And says that it's basically what I told you at the beginning of this lesson. So let's go ahead and look at your worksheet 9.3 right quick. All right. Now it says you can use a calculator on part 1. And it looks like that's it. Now, on number 1, there's A, B, and C. It says solve by multiplying the rate by the base. Rate times base equals your percentage. And show your work. Okay, so I'm going to help you with 1A. So it says, what is 25% of $340? Now I'm going to show you something that one of my algebra, well, not one, but my algebra teacher taught me when I was in algebra, and I was never good at algebra. I'm still not good at algebra. So whenever we get ready for algebra, we're going to be learning together if I'm still teaching you. Okay, so basically, I'm going to type that problem out. What is 25% of 340? Okay, now, okay, so that's the question. In math, anytime you see, I'm going to change my color to make it easier. Anytime you see that, okay, and this, okay, what can be anything. It can be any number. So we're just going to say N for number. Okay, the word is in math means equal always. Anytime you see is, it means equal. What can be any number. Okay, so what is 25%? Let's change that into a decimal. Remember, basically your decimal's right there, but to make a decimal out of it, you just move it 2 places to the left, remember? So we'll just put 0.25. Remember what of means? And then 340. Now, when you've taken apart these things, I remember my algebra teacher showing me that actually words can tell you what to do when you have these types of situations. Now you've gotten, actually we don't even need that last part. I don't know why I put that, because we've got our equal sign here. Basically, we've written it backwards. It's actually 0.25 times 340 equals what? Okay, so we can actually move this down here if it makes it more clear to you. N equals just, we call that a variable because it variates. It can be any number. It means what? So 0.25 times 340 equals what? So on your calculator, because you can use it, you would put in 0.25 times 340 equals, and that would be your answer. Okay, so anytime you see something like this, if you're confused, or a lot, I use this still in my real life. If I'm out somewhere, sometimes I'll say it, I'll make up the wording in my mind, and then I'll change it to an equation, and then I'll work it. I generally do it in my mind because I don't usually have paper right on me, or I might grab out my phone and do it on my phone, but it helps me It may not help you, but it may if you'll remember what these mean. Anyway, that's what you're going to do on 1A, B, and C. Let's see, 2 should be easy. At number 3, number 3, you're just going to be doing, you just can't use your calculator. That's all there. On number 4, you're going to convert these decimals to percents. Remember, all you need to do to convert a percent to a decimal is multiply by 100. Well, do you remember what we do when we multiply by 100? Move the decimal 2 places to the right when you multiply, okay? When you divide, you move it 2 places to the left, okay? So that's what you'll do on those. Number 5, 6, 7, all these on the back here. Okay, that should be pretty easy on the back. So I'm probably going to give you a grade on this page. I'll just write it on Google Classroom what it's going to be worth. But this lesson and the next lesson are lessons that you will use all the time in your real life. So these are really, really important. Anyway, so your assignment is to do worksheet 9.3.